I just got to keep trusting myself, working hard, trusting my teammates.
One of the best perimeter defenders in the freaking world, because people could see how special this man was going to be.
There's been a lot of surprises to this year's NBA season, whether it's whatever's going on between the Philadelphia 76ers and Joel Embiid, Charlotte Hornets becoming must-watch television for the stuff LaMelo Ball is doing, JJ Redick actually having the same starting record as Darvin Ham did last year, and whatever is going on with Tyrese Haliburton. Before we get to the content, make sure you drop like, subscribe, and turn on our notifications to help support the channel. And now that we get all of that out of the way, cue the intro. We had so much success on Thanksgiving with the Prize Picks free square. If you followed me on Instagram, then you would have seen my pick of Tyreek Hill, Jonnu Smith, and David Montgomery, which hit for a 5x return. Our square of Josh Jacobs and Devon Achane also converted, and my favorite part about this is getting DMs like this. One of my followers made $225 out of my picks on Thanksgiving, and I got many more DMs of you guys hitting with my picks as well. If you haven't signed up for Prize Picks, click on my link in the description or use my promo code microphone to get $50 when you make an entry of $5 or more. We're going to be making picks for the rest of the season for the NBA and NFL, and I give away my picks for free on Instagram and Snapchat. And thank you, Prize Picks, for the sponsor. Mic check 1 2 1 2. What's going on, everybody? Out of all the disappointing starts to this year's NBA season, the drop in Tyrese Haliburton's game has to be near the top of the list. A year after making his first ever All-NBA team and becoming only the 6th Indiana Pacer ever to do so, the former number 12 overall pick in the 2020 NBA draft seemed like he was becoming an actual franchise player, and he was beginning to even transcend that. Tyrese Haliburton earned an additional $41 million in salary by achieving All-NBA. He put himself in a position where he will now earn 30% of the Indiana Pacers salary cap in each of the next 5 seasons. And following the new CBA, that's a pretty big deal. If you guys noticed, the Los Angeles Clippers refused to pay Paul George maximum money. The New Orleans Pelicans don't know what to do with Brandon Ingram because he thinks he deserves a max contract and is a franchise player, but the Pelicans don't necessarily agree. Typically, you wouldn't have an argument about these types of things. If a player even flashed the slightest bit of potential as a franchise player or a high-end number 2 option, in the past you'd extend them. So the fact that Tyrese Haliburton has put himself in this position is very significant. The Indiana Pacers clearly feel strongly about him being their franchise cornerstone. So despite what we have seen from him so far this year, we have to remember that it wasn't even a year ago when it seemed like the Pacers were one of the up-and-coming teams, not only in the Eastern Conference, but in the entire NBA. The Pacers were so high on Tyrese Haliburton that they locked him in on a $244 million contract extension. That means he's going to be a Pacer through the 2028 to 2029 season. But the Pacers didn't stop there. They doubled down on this new investment. They decided to trade multiple first-round picks in order to bring in Pascal Siakam and give him a running mate that would allow them to compete deep into the playoffs for years to come. And if all of that belief in him wasn't enough, Haliburton even got the call to join Team USA's roster and compete in the Paris Olympics, where he, well, didn't play very much because Steve Kerr benched him. Now, the reason for that is up for debate. It's not like Steve Kerr has a squeaky clean reputation when it comes to tinkering with lineups. The man's tinkered with his lineup more than I have with my fantasy football lineup, but despite all of that, Haliburton's ascent into becoming one of the elite players in the NBA hasn't been questioned. You ask anyone at your school lunch table or at the barbershop when you're getting a haircut, and no one will dispute the fact that Tyrese Haliburton is a star in today's NBA, and that Kobe Bryant is one of the top 3 players of all time. There's no bias here. I mean, the man literally had just led the entire NBA in assists last year and led the Pacers through not 1 but 2 different playoff formats with tons of success to show for it. His absolute dominance was no more evident than last year's first ever NBA Cup, when he led the Pacers all the way to the championship game, which they eventually lost to my Los Angeles Lakers. Up until the finals, when he had 20 points and 11 assists, Tyrese Haliburton was averaging an absolutely insane stat line. 28 points, close to 14 14 assists, over 5 rebounds, and almost 2 steals a game, all while averaging roughly 50% from the field. I mean, just look how excited Richard Jefferson was when he was speaking about him during last year's Cup.
I'll show you this too. This man can drive to the basket and do anything. You watch him, get him on ice, he spun him around, and then he knocks down a three. He gets other people involved. That's why he's leading the league in assists. This man is special. He is different. It was a travesty when he got traded from Sacramento.
Yeah, the dude was literally playing out of his freaking mind, but it wasn't just the in-season tournament either. He was the single spark that led the Pacers to 47 wins in the regular season, which was by far their best mark in 5 years. He then capped it all off by taking the Indiana Pacers further than anyone expected and made it all the way to the Eastern Conference Finals, where they would eventually get swept by Boston, but they weren't at full strength either. Now here's where it gets tricky. With all of this now in the rear view, I think I speak for everyone when I say that even though he's put together a few good performances recently, the guy who actually entered the MVP discussion at points last season and was making the NBA look like Tetris on easy mode just hasn't looked like the same player that we've grown accustomed to seeing. And that's being nice about it. If you go and look at the numbers, they're not pretty. He's currently putting up his worst average of points and assists in the last 3 years, the worst rebounding total of the last 4, and the worst 3-point and overall field goal percentages of his entire career. He also started giving us a little two-faced action and is scoring over 10 points per game less on the road, as well as shooting 15% less from the field. If it was just a point or two lower or a few percentage points lower, then I could understand. But guys, we're talking about double digits here. Those are big numbers that just add more layers to the mystery. So for a guy who averaged over 20 points and 10 assists per game over the last 2 seasons, it just doesn't make any sense. A potentially bad thing for Haliburton, and especially for Pacers fans in general, is that a recent interview with the man himself completely failed to enlighten people as to even a single reason for his struggles. But before I speculate on what some of those reasons could be, seeing him in this interview definitely does not give anyone an optimistic feeling for better days in Indianapolis.
You've now had a while to be working through this. I mean, do you have a better sense of what's going on?
No.
How are you feeling mentally, not being able to know or just get through it?
It's part of it. It's part of basketball. I just got to keep trusting myself, working hard, trusting my teammates, and I'll figure it out.
Anyone you've tried to rely on or turn to in this?
Yeah, a lot of people. But just put my head down, keep working, I'll figure it out.
The strange silver lining for Indiana fans, however, is that ever since this interview, he's strung together a few solid performances. However, it's still not enough for us to stop speculating about the reasons for his downfall. But instead of doing only that and throwing out wild takes, except the one we had a little bit earlier, I actually want to go over some legitimate reasons as to why he has slid so far. The first one that cannot be overlooked, that a lot of people have been considering, is if he has actually been playing with an injury or not. And unless someone comes out and speaks about it, it can't be known, but I wouldn't put it out of the question. After all, there's been rumors that not only has he been playing with a bad back, but that he may have never fully recovered from the hamstring injury that he initially experienced last January in a thrilling 133-131 regular season victory against the Boston Celtics. He then re-injured it against them in the playoffs and had to be carried off the floor by his teammates. And for the haters who are saying that the injury is nothing more than an excuse for his bad play, I think seeing the replay will actually change your mind completely about this. I mean, just look at the video. The man did a full split, for crying out loud. But beyond just the gruesome injury itself, the reason I think that this may be the most probable cause for his drop-off is that if you look at his numbers before and after last year's All-Star break, which was around the same time as the injury, that's the exact time we saw his dip in play begin. Just look at this. The drop in his statistical dominance brought him back down to earth so far that people began questioning if he had ever been that good to begin with. And there's a lot of theories out there. Some think it's a drop in confidence following Steve Kerr benching him during the 2024 Olympics, while others have proposed that Tyrese Haliburton has been distracted and that it is his lifestyle that has impacted his play in a negative way. And no, I'm not saying the recent obsession with snow bunnies is the reason why Tyrese Haliburton is shooting 15% less from the field. Some of you guys have even reached out to me on Instagram and told me that this one moment was the downfall of Tyrese Tyrese Haliburton. My man had an entire Starbucks order over there, but I don't think that's a legitimate reason why Tyrese Haliburton is struggling. And sure, even though that's a comical theory that we may throw on meme pages or post on our story just to get a nice laugh, I actually think that there's one major reason that has gone under the radar. There's been one player that has been very important to the fiber of the Indiana Pacers, a player that has significantly improved the Golden State Warriors this year and has filled the void of Klay Thompson remarkably. If you guys remember last year, the Indiana Pacers traded away Buddy Hield. This is a guy that has literally made a career out of spacing the floor and has recently climbed into the top 20 of the all-time three-pointer list after passing guys like Dirk Nowitzki and Joe Johnson. Now, what this means in terms of Haliburton should be pretty obvious, seeing as we have witnessed the life Buddy Hield has breathed into the Golden State Warriors so far this season, and despite the Pacers having somewhat lucked their way into a relatively easy path to last year's East Finals, including beating the Milwaukee Bucks without Giannis Antetokounmpo, ever since Haliburton lost the spacing that Hield gave him, getting into the paint and creating has been much more difficult. Then when you factor in that Haliburton got the payday that he did, and you can begin to see how many different factors that there could be playing into this. Nonetheless, the bottom line is that if he is the superstar that everyone thought he was in the process of becoming, then he'll find a way to climb back to his former heights. Which brings me back to the point I mentioned earlier. Just this week, it seems like he may be turning a corner to getting back to his old self. After putting up 34 points and 13 assists in a recent win versus the Pelicans, Haliburton was quoted shortly after the game saying this.
I think what I just have to keep is my joy for the game of basketball, and everybody wants to say, be happy, have fun. Well, that's hard to do when you're not playing well or you're losing, but I think differentiating the difference between happiness and joy. I've always had a joy for the game of basketball and a love and appreciation for what I do in this game my whole life. So I think I just got caught in this becoming, getting frustrated with myself and this kind of creeping into like job territory, and that weighing on me. And I think it's just been big for me to keep that joy and that love and passion for the game of basketball because I genuinely do love what I do. I love this organization. I love my teammates.
Though it sounds a little cliche, I have to say that I think if he can manage to do that, then it is certainly the only path that the Pacers have back towards the top of the East. I also think it's important to put all this in perspective and not get too caught up in the headlines and hype about how he's actually not that good. Clearly, you have to be incredible to average 20 points and 10 assists for 2 years in a row in the NBA. If we're being real, he's far from the first superstar to ever have had an extended cold streak. Even Hall of Famers such as Ray Allen have experienced dire times like Haliburton has been facing. Or who can forget that Kobe Bryant was once the best player on a team that lost 10 games in a row. Now don't get me wrong, I wouldn't dare compare Haliburton to Ray Allen yet, and definitely not to my late great GOAT Kobe Bryant, but I'm just simply pointing out that sometimes these things happen, and players, even star players sometimes, have to rediscover themselves. So who knows, maybe that's exactly what's happening with Hallie, because in his last 3 games, Haliburton has put up a combined 83 points and 32 assists while shooting almost 50% from beyond the arc. But what's really important about that is that it proves his importance to the team and how he is the engine that makes them go, because it's no coincidence that ever since he's begun showing signs of the old Haliburton, the Pacers have won 3 games in a row and clawed back within 1 game of 500. Whether or not he's officially back can only be told with time, but things seem to be finally trending in the right direction. Where that'll lead the Pacers is up for debate, but as for the 2-time All-Star and the face of the Pacers, I fully expect him to get back to where he was and quiet all these haters down before too long. Now, if you think Tyrese Haliburton's fall off is crazy, you should see what's going on with Zion Williamson. This man posted the worst video he possibly could have, where he's just eating food and chilling behind the scenes. We have a whole separate video of that on the end screen. I'll meet you guys there. Aside from that, I'm your boy Mike, and I'm dropping our mic until our next upload.